pollination. In the preceding sections, you've learned that the male and female gametes in flowering plants are produced in the pollen grain and embryo sac respectively. The male gamete is the pollen grain and the female gamete is the embryo sac. As both types of gametes, that is the pollen grain and the embryo sac, as both the types of the gametes are non-motile, that is they can't move, they have to be brought together for fertilization to occur. So what is fertilization? The fusion of male and female gamete to form a zygote, right? If they have to fuse, they have to come together, but they are non-motile. So how is this achieved? And to achieve that objective, that is the fertilization, we have a mechanism called as pollination. And the transfer of pollen grains set from the anther to the stigma of a pistil is termed pollination. So we have the pollen grains set from the anther to the stigma of a pistil is termed as pollination. The transfer of pollen grains set from the anther to the stigma of a pistil is termed as pollination. Flowering plants have evolved an amazing array of adaptations to achieve pollination. They make use of external agents to achieve pollination. Even animals are included as the external agents. Can you list the possible external agents? We have wind, water, animals for the external agents to achieve pollination. And the next topic is kinds of pollination. Depending on the source of pollen, pollination can be divided into 3 types: Otogami, Xenogamy, and Xenogamy. So first, let's try to learn in detail about the Otogamy. In this type, pollination is achieved within the same flower. We also called Otogamy as self-pollination. Transfer pollen grains from the anther to the stigma of the same flower, okay? Of the same flower. From if this is from the diagram before, we know that the pollen grains will be from the anther, right? So if they are in the same flower, if the pollen grains from the anther is in the same flower of the stigma, then we call this Otogamy. In a normal flower which opens and exposes the anthers and the stigma, complete Otogamy is rather rare. Why? Because Otogamy insect flowers requires synchrony in pollen release and stigma receptivity also. What is synchrony? Synchrony means they have to occur at the same time. The pollen release and the stigma receptivity will have to occur at the same time. So in order to know, let's say like this. See, if you have to give a gift to a person, right? A present. Okay, a gift or a present, let's say, to a person, then if the person does not accept it, it's not synchronized. You are not synchronizing, right? You have to give, if your present needs to be received by the other person, then only then it will be synchronized. And also it needs the time you give and the time she or he accepts needs to be at the same time. So they have to be synchronized, okay? And for example, let's say the pollen is already released and the stigma will not receive it, no use, right? So they have to be synchronized, okay? So Otogamy requires flowers to be synchronized. The anthers and the stigma should lie close to each other so that self-pollination can occur, that is Otogamy, okay? Some plants such as viola, that is common pansy, oxalis, and commelina produce 2 types of flowers: Chesmogramus flowers and Cleistogamous flowers. Chesmogramus and Cleistogamous. And what is Chesmogramus flowers? They are the flowers which are similar to flowers of other species with exposed anthers and stigma, okay? And Cleistogamous flowers which do not open at all. Just remember that Chesmo is opened or exposed. Cleisto is closed or not opened. Okay, Chesmo open. Just know that Chesmo is Cleisto, right? Cleisto CL, then close CL, CL. Cleisto close, right? Cleisto spelling is CLEISTO. Then it is close. And Chesmo will be open. The opposite of Cleisto is Chesmo, so it is open. Cleisto CL close CL, so Cleisto close. Understand? In such flowers, the anthers and stigma lie close to each other. When anther dehisce in the flower buds, pollen grains come in contact with the stigma to affect pollination. Thus, Chesmogramus flowers are invariably autogamous as there is no chance of cross-pollen landing on the stigma. Okay, let me give this example. If you always close your house, then nobody from the outside is going to come in because you lock yourself up, right? And so there is no chance that strangers will come. So it's very likely that Chesmogramus will perform Otogami, that is self-pollination. Okay. And Chesmogramus it's very open. The flowers are open. So if you always open your door, some people, they can just come in and ask for water or something. They can just come in, right? So Chesmogramus flowers, they are more likely to do cross-pollination, and Chesmogramus, as they are close, they are always close. So it's more likely that they will have self-pollination because the strangers or the outside people or the outside things, external things, won't be able to enter. Okay, so Chesmogramus is likely to perform self-pollination more than Chesmogramus flowers. Chesmogramus flowers produce assured seed set even in the absence of pollinators. Okay, and next let's go to Xenogamy. So first we already did Otogami, and now we'll go to Xenogamy. What is Xenogamy? Transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma of another flower of the same plant. How many flowers do a plant have? It might be different. Some flowers might have only one, some flowers might have only two, or some plants may have only two, and some plants will have multiple flowers, countless flowers, right? So for Xenogamy, it will be Xenogamy is a mixture of self-pollination and cross-pollination. Why? Self-pollination because it occurs in the same plant but different flowers. Same plant but different flower. Okay? Xenogamy is same plant but different flowers. So I said self-pollination and also cross-pollination. Okay? Cross-pollination because the flowers are already different, right? And although Xenogamy functionally cross-pollination involving pollinating agents, genetically it is similar to Otogamy since the pollen grains come from the same plant. It is cross-pollination, but genetically it will be Otogamy, that is self-pollination. And the last is Xenogamy. Xenogamy is the transfer of pollen grains from anther to the stigma of a different plant, okay? Of a different plant, and it will also be different flower. Different plant, different flowers. So Xenogamy is cross-pollination. This is the only type of pollination which during pollination brings genetically different types of pollen grains to the stigma. So why are they genetically different now? Because the pollen grains are from different plant to another, from one plant to another plant. The plant is already different, so it will bring difference. The genetic the genes, or the genes of the plant will be different for every different plant, so it will be genetically different. And now next we'll go to essence of pollinations. Plants use two abiotic, that is wind and water, and one abiotic animal. So we have three together. Okay, the essence of pollination, we have three. That is wind, water, and animals. Wind and water is abiotic, that means they are non-living. Biotic means living, so animals, to achieve pollination. Majority of plants use biotic agents for pollination. Only a small proportion of plants use abiotic agents. Pollen grains coming in contact with the stigma is a chance factor in both wind and water pollination. Why is it called a chance factor? Because chance, when we talk about chance, it's more like lucky. Which one is have more luck? It's more about luck, when it's about when pollination is by wind and water. So for animals, if it is for animals, it is more likely that the pollination is going to succeed. And to compensate for these uncertainties and associated loss of pollen grains, the flowers produce enormous amount of pollen when compared to the number of ovules available for pollination. So since it is a chance factor, that means we don't know whether the pollination the pollen grains will reach the stigma or not. Okay, so there will be lots of pollen grains out of 10,000 pollen grains. Okay, let's say out of it will release thousands of pollen grains. So out of 1,000 or 10,000 pollen grains, at least one, so that at least one can reach the stigma. So enormous amount of pollen will be released for when it is by wind or water pollination. And among the abiotic pollination, pollination by wind is more common than pollination by water. Wind pollination also requires that the pollen grains are light, that is light and then non-sticky. So what are the requirements for wind pollination? They have to be light and they have to be non-sticky so that they can be transported in wind currents. Okay, they often possess well-exposed stamens so that the pollens are easily dispersed into wind currents. If you forget it, let's try to remember what is stamen. Stamen is the filament plus anther. The long and slender stalk called filament and the bilobate structure called anther is made up the stamens. Okay, you need to still remember it. Well exposed stamens and large, often feathery stigma to easily trap airborne pollen grains. Okay. Wind pollinated flowers often have a single ovule in its ovary and numerous flowers packed into an inflorescence. A familiar example is the corncob. The tassels you see are nothing but the stigma and style which wave in the wind to trap pollen grains. Wind pollination is quite common in grasses. And next we'll go to pollination by water. Just know that for pollination by wind it has two requirements, that is light and non-sticky. And example, corn cob. Okay, corn cob. Pollination by water is quite rare in flowering plants and is limited to about 30 genera, mostly monocotyledons. As against this, you would recall that water is a regular mode of transport for the male gametes among the lower plant groups such as algae, bryophytes, and pteridophytes. It is believed that, particularly for some bryophytes and pteridophytes, that their distribution is limited because of the need for water for the transfer of male gametes and fertilization. Some examples of water-pollinated plants are Vallisneria and Hydrilla, which grow in fresh water, and several marine seagrasses such as Zostera. Not all aquatic plants use water for pollination. Remember this well, not all aquatic plants use water for pollination. In a majority of aquatic plants such as water hyacinth and water lily, the flowers emerge above the level of water and are pollinated by insects or wind, as in most of the land plants. In Vallisneria, the female flower reaches the surface of water by the long stalk, and the male flowers or pollen grains are released onto the surface of water. They are carried passively by water currents. Some of them eventually reach the female flowers and the stigma. In another group of water-pollinated plants such as sea grasses, female flowers remain submerged in water and the pollen grains are released inside the water. Pollen grains in many such species are long, ribbon-like, and they are carried passively inside the water. Some of them reach the stigma and achieve pollination. In most of the water-pollinated species, underline this one, pollen grains are protected from wetting by a mucilaginous covering. Okay, both wind and water pollinated flowers are not very colorful and do not produce nectar. Why? Why do you think so? Because why are flowers colorful? Because they have an aim. Okay, they have to be attractive so that the flowers so that the animals, the insects can be attracted to them. See, if you will get dressed up, if you want other to recognize you, you'll dress up, you'll do makeup or something in order to be recognized, right? So in the same way, for them, for wind and water pollinated flowers, they don't have to attract anyone. They don't have to attract anyone, so they don't have to do makeup or they don't have to be colorful. Majority of flowering plants use a range of animals as pollinating agents. Bees, butterflies, flies, beetles, wasps, ants, moths, birds, sunbirds, and hummingbirds and bats are the common pollinating agents. Just try to remember just bees, butterflies. We can just give examples, 2 or 3. And among the animals, insects, particularly bees. Bees are the dominant biotic pollinating agents. This is important. Bees are the dominant biotic pollinating agents. Even larger animals such as primates, lemurs, arboreal tree-dwelling rodents, or even reptiles, gecko, lizard, and garden lizard have also been reported as pollinators in some species. Often, flowers of animal pollinated plants are specifically adapted for a particular species of animals. Majority of insect pollinated flowers are large, colorful, fragrant, and rich in nectar. So if you want to be attractive nowadays, people, they put perfumes, they put makeup so that they smell nice, and in the same way, since they have to be attractive, they have to be large, colorful, fragrant, and rich in nectar, and they need to give reward to them. So they need to produce nectar. When the flowers are small, a number of flowers are clustered into an inflorescence to make them conspicuous. Animals are attracted to flowers by color or fragrance. The flowers pollinated by flies and beetles secrete full odor to attract these animals. And you know what? And the smell, the fragrance can be different because for flies and beetles, they like the smell of bad. They like bad smell, so the flowers need to secrete full smell or a bad smell to attract these flies and beetles. To sustain animal visits, the flowers have to provide rewards to the animals. Okay. Nectar and pollen grains are the usual floral rewards. For I think that for this flowers, they spend too much. They need to be attractive. They have to be colorful. They need to smell good. They need to have that certain smell, and they also need to give rewards. The animals are quite lucky, isn't it, for their work of acting as the pollinating agent. Let's just say they are the postman to the postman, in which they will deliver the pollen grains, so they need to get salary, and their salary is the nectar. Nectar is the sweet smelling liquid produced by the flowers. And for harvesting the rewards from the flower, the animal visitor comes in contact with the anthers and the stigma. The body of the animal gets a coating of pollen grains, which are the coating of pollen grains, which are generally sticky in animal pollinated flowers. When the animal carrying pollen on its body comes in contact with the stigma, it brings about pollination. So how is this pollination by animals then? So the animals will land on the flowers, and then from the anther, so the pollen grains will be stick to their like their legs, or it will be sticking to their body. And when they move again to another flower, then they will land on the stigma. The animal will land on the stigma. That means, so now they will pass the pollen grains to the stigma. So they act as the pollinating agent. In some species, floral rewards are in providing safe places to lay eggs. Okay, the floral rewards might not be nectar and pollen grains, but the floral rewards can be also providing safe places to lay eggs. An example is that of the tallest flower of Amorphophallus. Okay, the flower itself is about 6 feet in height. A similar relationship exists between a species of moth and the plant yucca, where both species, moth and the plant, cannot complete their life cycle without each other. So, what is it? What are the two plants? That is, what is the name of the animal and the plant which can complete their life cycle without each other? Then we can say moth and yucca. Y-U-C-C-A, yucca. Okay. The moth deposits its eggs in the locule of the ovary, and the flower in return gets pollinated by the moth. The larvae of the moth comes out of the eggs as the seeds start developing. So can you understand this part? The moth, okay, they have to they have to help each other. The moth will deposit its egg in the locule of the ovary of the flower, and then the pollination will be the pollination of the yucca plant will be the pollinating agent of the yucca plant is the moth, and the yucca plant will provide a safe place for moth to lay their eggs. So this is all about the pollination and pollinating agents.